Months turned into years, and Evelyn's legacy continued to grow, touching lives far beyond her quiet suburban neighborhood. The reforms she championed within the police department became a model for other cities grappling with similar issues. Law enforcement agencies across the country adopted anti-bias training programs inspired by her work, while civilian oversight boards gained traction as a way to rebuild trust between communities and those sworn to protect them. Her name was mentioned in legislative debates, academic studies, and even late-night talk shows, always with admiration, always with gratitude. Evelyn herself remained humble despite the accolades. She never sought fame or recognition, focusing instead on the tangible impact of her efforts. At 72, she showed no signs of slowing down. Her days were filled with meetings, workshops, and speeches, but she still made time for the simple joys that had always grounded her: baking cookies, tending to her garden, and spending precious moments with her grandchildren. Now teenagers, Marcus, Lily, and Mia carried her lessons into their own lives, each finding unique ways to contribute to the world around them. Marcus, now 16, dreamed of becoming a lawyer like his grandmother. He interned at a local legal aid clinic, helping clients navigate complex systems and advocating for fairness. His passion mirrored Evelyn's determination, and she often joked that he would surpass her one day. Lily, 14, used her poetry to inspire others, performing at events nationwide and publishing a collection titled Voices of Justice. Its proceeds went directly to funding educational programs for underprivileged youth. Even Mia, 12, found her niche, creating vibrant murals in public spaces that celebrated diversity and unity. Together, they ensured that Evelyn's message of hope and resilience reached new generations. The officers involved in Evelyn's arrest faced justice, not only through formal charges, but also through personal reckonings. One officer left the force entirely, citing a loss of faith in his ability to serve impartially. Another enrolled in community service programs, working alongside activists to better understand the harm caused by systemic bias. While forgiveness didn't come easily for everyone, Evelyn encouraged dialogue over division, believing that true healing required empathy from both sides. Her nonprofit organization, Pathways to Justice, thrived under her leadership. It expanded its reach internationally, partnering with organizations in other countries to combat discrimination and inequality. Workshops evolved into immersive experiences, using storytelling, art, and technology to engage participants of all ages. Evelyn traveled less frequently now, delegating responsibilities to trusted colleagues, but her presence loomed large over every project. When asked about her vision for the future, she often said, "I want us to leave behind a world where no child has to fear being treated unfairly because of who they are." One crisp autumn morning, Evelyn stood in her backyard, watching golden leaves swirl in the breeze. Her grandchildren played nearby, their laughter filling the air. She felt a deep sense of peace, not because everything was perfect, but because progress was possible. The road ahead would undoubtedly have challenges, but she knew the seeds of change had been planted. They were growing steadily, nourished by love, courage, and collective action. That evening, during a small gathering at her home, Evelyn shared a story she hadn't told before. It was about her own grandmother, who had lived through segregation and taught her the importance of standing tall in the face of adversity. She used to say, "Storms will come, but storms also water the earth," Evelyn recalled, her voice soft yet powerful. "And that's what we're doing here. We're watering the earth so something beautiful can grow." As her guests applauded, Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. She wasn't just building a legacy. She was planting roots for a brighter tomorrow. And though she knew her journey wouldn't last forever, she took comfort in knowing that her grandchildren, and countless others, would carry the torch long after she was gone. In the end, Evelyn Thompson wasn't just a symbol of justice. She was proof that even in the darkest storms, light could shine through, and that together, people could create a world worth fighting for. As the months rolled on, Evelyn's influence continued to grow. transforming her from a quiet grandmother into a national symbol of resilience and justice. Her nonprofit organization, Pathways to Justice quickly gained traction, attracting volunteers, donors, and supporters from all walks of life. What started as a small initiative in her living room blossomed into a nationwide movement, with chapters springing up in cities across the country. Workshops were held in community centers, schools, and even libraries, teaching people how to recognize bias, assert their rights, and advocate for fairness in their own neighborhoods. Evelyn traveled frequently, speaking at conferences, town halls, and universities. Her speeches were always heartfelt and practical, blending personal stories with actionable advice. She often began by recounting the day of her arrest, not to dwell on the pain, but to highlight the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. "They thought they could silence me," she would say, her voice steady yet warm. "But what they didn't realize was that my voice wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone who has ever been told they don't matter." Her words resonated deeply, especially with young people. Many students reached out to thank her for inspiring them to pursue careers in law, activism, or public service. One high school senior named Jamal wrote her a letter saying he had decided to study criminal justice because of her example. "You showed me that one person can make a difference," he wrote. Evelyn framed the letter and kept it on her desk, a reminder of why she did what she did. Back home, Evelyn's grandchildren became local heroes in their own right. Marcus, now 11, took charge of organizing fundraisers for the nonprofit, setting up bake sales and car washes that drew crowds of neighbors eager to support the cause. Lily, 9, became known for her poetry readings at community events, where her heartfelt verses about equality brought audiences to tears. Even little Mia, now 7, contributed by creating artwork that was auctioned off to raise money for legal aid programs. Together, they proved that no contribution was too small when it came to making the world a better place. The ripple effects of Evelyn's work extended beyond her immediate circle. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began volunteering alongside her, finding purpose in collective action. A retired teacher named Mrs. Patel started leading educational workshops for seniors, helping them understand their rights during interactions with law enforcement. A group of teenagers formed a youth council dedicated to addressing issues like racial profiling and unequal treatment in schools. Everywhere Evelyn looked, she saw people stepping up, united by a shared vision of fairness and respect. Even the police department underwent significant changes. The reforms Evelyn had championed, mandatory anti-bias training, body cameras, and civilian oversight boards, began to take root. Officers attended seminars led by experts in diversity and inclusion, learning how to approach their jobs with empathy and accountability. Some officers admitted privately that they had never considered how their actions might affect marginalized communities until Evelyn's case forced them to confront uncomfortable truths. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. One particularly touching moment came when a young officer visited Evelyn at her home. He introduced himself nervously, explaining that he had recently joined the force and wanted to learn from her experiences. "I don't want to be part of the problem," he said earnestly. "I want to help fix it." Evelyn welcomed him warmly, offering guidance and encouragement. By the end of their conversation, the young man left with tears in his eyes, vowing to honor her trust by serving with integrity. Despite the progress, Evelyn remained grounded, refusing to let success go to her head. She still tended to her garden, baked cookies for her grandchildren, and spent quiet evenings reading by the fire. But there was a new spark in her, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had made a difference. When asked in interviews if she ever felt overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities, she simply smiled and said, "Change is hard work, but it's worth every step." Her story served as a testament to the power of resilience and compassion. She had faced hatred and emerged stronger, not through revenge or bitterness, but through love and determination. And while she knew the fight for justice was far from over, she also believed in the strength of unity. Every workshop, every protest, every child inspired. It all added up to something greater than herself. Evelyn Thompson had become more than a grandmother, a judge, or an activist. She was a beacon of hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through. The momentum sparked by Evelyn's arrest continued to grow, transforming her small suburban neighborhood into a beacon of activism and solidarity. What had begun as an isolated act of injustice was now a catalyst for widespread change, drawing attention from local leaders, national organizations, and even lawmakers. The officers involved in Evelyn's wrongful arrest found themselves at the center of a storm they couldn't escape. Internal investigations revealed troubling patterns of discriminatory behavior within the police department, including prior complaints that had been brushed aside or ignored altogether. As the evidence mounted, public pressure reached a fever pitch. Protesters marched daily, their chants echoing through the streets. Justice for Evelyn. Bias has no place here. Local businesses showed their support by displaying signs in their windows, while schools incorporated discussions about systemic racism and fairness into their curriculums. Even children joined in, inspired by Evelyn's grandchildren, who spoke passionately at rallies about how their grandmother had taught them to stand up for what is right. Finally, months after the incident, accountability arrived. Two of the officers directly involved in Evelyn's arrest were formally charged with misconduct and abuse of power. The third officer, who had tried to downplay the situation, faced disciplinary action and was demoted. The police chief issued a public apology, acknowledging the harm caused not only to Evelyn but to the entire community. While some criticized the measures as too little, too late, others saw it as a crucial first step toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the people they served. Evelyn watched these developments with a mix of emotions. On one hand, she felt a deep sense of relief, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by those sworn to protect them. On the other hand, she knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Justice wasn't just about punishing bad actors. It was about creating systems that prevented such injustices from happening in the first place. To that end, Evelyn threw herself into advocacy work with renewed energy. She founded a nonprofit organization called Pathways to Justice dedicated to educating communities about their rights and empowering individuals to challenge bias and discrimination. The organization offered free workshops, legal resources, and mentorship programs, particularly targeting young people. Evelyn believed strongly that the next generation held the key to lasting change, and she wanted to equip them with the tools they needed to lead the charge. Her grandchildren became active participants in the movement, finding pride in their grandmother's legacy. Marcus helped design a logo for the nonprofit, a pair of scales surrounded by blooming flowers, and Lily wrote poems about justice and equality that were shared widely on social media. Even Mia contributed by decorating donation boxes with colorful drawings. Together, they proved that no matter your age, you could make a difference. At the same time, Evelyn collaborated with city officials to implement sweeping reforms within the police department. These included mandatory anti-bias training, body cameras for all officers, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board to review complaints against law enforcement. Though resistance lingered among some members of the department, the overwhelming support from the community made it clear that change was non-negotiable. One evening, as Evelyn sat on her porch watching the sunset, she reflected on how far they had come. The scars of that day remained. She still thought often of the fear in her grandchildren's eyes. But so did the victories. Neighbors stopped by regularly to thank her, sharing stories of how her courage had inspired them to confront injustices in their own lives. Reporters occasionally called, asking for updates on her work, but Evelyn always redirected the focus to the collective effort. "This isn't my story," she would say. "It's ours." In the distance, laughter rang out as her grandchildren played tag in the yard, their giggles mingling with the rustling leaves. Evelyn smiled, feeling a profound sense of hope. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but she knew they were moving in the right direction. Change was never easy, but with persistence and unity, Anything was possible, and Evelyn Thompson, a grandmother, a judge, and now a symbol of resilience, was determined to keep leading the way. The days following Evelyn's release were a whirlwind of activity, both for her and the community that had rallied around her. The story of her wrongful arrest dominated headlines, sparking conversations far beyond the quiet suburban neighborhood where it had begun. News outlets interviewed neighbors, activists, and even former colleagues of Evelyn, all of whom painted a vivid picture of the woman at the center of the storm, a retired federal judge who had spent decades fighting for justice, only to become a victim of the very biases she had worked tirelessly to dismantle. Evelyn herself became an unexpected figurehead in the growing movement for accountability and reform. She gave interviews from her living room, seated beside her grandchildren, her voice steady and unwavering as she recounted the events of that fateful day. "This isn't just about me," she emphasized repeatedly. "It's about every person who has been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin or the assumptions others make about them. We have to stand together and say enough is enough." Her words resonated deeply with people across the country. Social media buzzed with stories of similar experiences, ordinary citizens sharing their own encounters with discrimination and injustice. Many credited Evelyn with giving them the courage to speak out. Her name became synonymous with resilience, and her face appeared on posters and banners at protests nationwide. Yet, despite the attention, Evelyn remained humble, focusing not on personal vindication, but on systemic change. Behind the scenes, Daniel Hayes worked tirelessly to ensure that those responsible for Evelyn's arrest would be held accountable. He filed formal complaints against the officers involved, citing evidence of misconduct and racial bias. Internal investigations were launched by the police department, though initial resistance suggested attempts to protect those implicated. But public pressure mounted relentlessly. Protesters gathered outside the precinct daily, chanting slogans like "Truth over bias" and "Justice can't wait." Local leaders joined the calls for transparency, demanding answers and reforms. Meanwhile, Evelyn turned her home into a hub of activism. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers streamed in and out, organizing rallies, drafting petitions, and planning educational workshops. Her grandchildren, inspired by their grandmother's strength, took an active role in the efforts. Marcus created flyers using colorful markers and glitter glue, while Lily helped sort donated supplies for upcoming events. Even young Mia contributed, drawing pictures of justice scales surrounded by hearts and flowers. For the first time since the arrest, laughter returned to Evelyn's house, not replacing the pain, but coexisting with it, a reminder of hope amidst struggle. One evening, as Evelyn sat at her kitchen table reviewing plans for an upcoming town hall meeting, Daniel called with promising news. "They're starting to crack," he said, his tone triumphant. "Two of the officers have already been placed on administrative leave, and there's talk of disciplinary action against the entire unit. This is just the beginning, Evelyn. They can't ignore the spotlight anymore." Evelyn nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. While she felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that progress was being made, she also understood that true change required more than punishing individuals. It demanded addressing the root causes of prejudice and inequality. That's why she insisted on using her platform to educate rather than merely accuse. At the town hall meeting a few days later, she delivered a powerful speech, urging attendees to channel their anger into constructive action. "We must hold institutions accountable," she said, her voice echoing through the packed auditorium. "But we must also look inward. Are we doing enough to challenge stereotypes in our own lives? Are we teaching our children to value empathy over judgment? Change starts with us, with how we treat one another every single day." Her message struck a chord, earning standing ovations and spurring meaningful discussions long after the event ended. Slowly but surely, the tide began to shift. Policies within the police department came under scrutiny, leading to proposals for mandatory anti-bias training and increased oversight. Community members formed advisory boards to foster dialogue between residents and law enforcement. And Evelyn, ever the guiding light, continued to lead by example, proving that even in the face of adversity, compassion and determination could pave the way forward. As the weeks passed, it became clear that Evelyn's arrest had ignited something much larger than anyone could have predicted. What started as a personal injustice had transformed into a collective call for accountability and healing. Though challenges lay ahead, Evelyn stood ready to face them, not alone. As the night wore on, Evelyn's quiet confidence began to ripple outward, setting off a chain reaction that neither she nor the officers could have anticipated. Her single phone call to an old friend and renowned civil rights attorney named Daniel Hayes proved to be the spark that ignited a firestorm. Daniel had worked alongside Evelyn during her time as a federal judge, and their bond went beyond mere professional respect. They were allies in the fight for justice. When Evelyn explained what had happened, his voice turned sharp with disbelief and anger. "Evelyn, this is unacceptable," Daniel said firmly over the phone. "You leave this to me. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what they've done." True to his word, Daniel sprang into action immediately. He contacted reporters he trusted, shared details of Evelyn's arrest, and emphasized her credentials as a retired federal judge. Within hours, the story began to gain traction online. Social media platforms lit up with posts about the incident, many accompanied by photos of Evelyn from her days on the bench or candid shots of her smiling with her grandchildren. Hashtags like #JusticeForEvelyn and #StandWithGrams started trending, drawing attention not only locally but across the country. By morning, the precinct was swarmed with journalists and cameras. Reporters shouted questions at bewildered officers as they entered and exited the building. Why was a respected former judge arrested? One demanded. What evidence justified detaining her? Another pressed. The officers, caught off guard by the sudden media frenzy, scrambled to contain the situation. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Public outrage was growing, fueled by the stark contrast between Evelyn's calm dignity and the aggressive behavior of those who had wrongfully detained her. Meanwhile, back in her neighborhood, word of Evelyn's arrest spread quickly among her friends and neighbors. Many were shocked and angered by the treatment of someone they considered a cornerstone of the community. A group of them gathered outside her house, where her frightened grandchildren were being comforted by a close family friend. Together, they decided to organize a peaceful protest outside the precinct later that day. Flyers were printed, messages shared, and plans made, all in support of Evelyn and her fight for justice. Inside the holding cell, Evelyn remained composed, though she couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication as she heard snippets of the commotion outside. Officers whispered nervously in the hallways, and the atmosphere grew tense. At one point, a sergeant approached her cell, his expression uneasy. "Mrs. Thompson," he began hesitantly, we're looking into your case more thoroughly. Things might move faster now." Evelyn met his gaze evenly. "It's about time," she replied simply, her tone measured but firm. She didn't gloat or taunt him. There was no need. Her presence alone, combined with the mounting pressure from the public, spoke volumes. Later that afternoon, Evelyn was finally released pending further investigation. As she stepped out of the precinct, blinking in the bright sunlight, she was greeted by a sea of familiar faces. Her neighbors, friends, and even strangers held signs bearing messages of solidarity. "We stand with Evelyn. No justice, no peace. Respect our elders." Tears filled her eyes as she took in the sight, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. Her grandchildren ran to her, throwing their arms around her tightly. "Grams, we knew you'd be okay," Marcus exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn hugged them close, whispering words of reassurance. "I told you everything would be all right," she said softly, kissing the tops of their heads. "But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what we did today." As the crowd cheered, Evelyn addressed them briefly, thanking everyone for standing with her. Her voice carried strength and conviction, reminding everyone present why she had once been such a formidable figure in the courtroom. "This isn't the end," she declared. "It's only the beginning. Together, we can create change, not just for ourselves, but for future generations." The officers watched from inside the precinct, their earlier arrogance replaced by unease. They had underestimated Evelyn Thompson, mistaking her kindness for weakness and her silence for compliance. Now, they were facing the full weight of her power, not just as a grandmother, but as a symbol of resilience and justice. And deep down, they knew there would be no turning back. As Evelyn sat in the back seat of the police car, her mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions. She felt anger, not for herself, but for her grandchildren, who had been forced to witness such a cruel and unjust scene. She thought about little Lily's tears and Marcus's desperate attempts to defend her. No child should ever have to see their beloved grandmother treated like a criminal, especially when she had done nothing wrong. But amidst the pain, Evelyn also felt a deep resolve bubbling within her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message that no one, no matter their authority or badge, was above accountability. When they arrived at the precinct, Evelyn was led inside and placed in a small, cold holding cell. The officers ignored her repeated requests for an explanation, treating her as though she were guilty until proven innocent. Her hand still bore the marks from the handcuffs, but she refused to let them see her discomfort. Instead, she sat upright on the hard bench, her posture dignified and unshaken. Years of experience in courtrooms had taught her how to remain composed under pressure, and she drew on that strength now. The hours ticked by slowly, each minute feeling heavier than the last. Evelyn replayed the events in her mind, analyzing every word and action from the officers. Their dismissive tone, their refusal to listen, and the thinly veiled hostility. They all pointed to something deeper than a simple misunderstanding. Evelyn recognized the signs of bias, the kind that had followed her throughout her life. It was painful, but not surprising. What did surprise her, however, was the audacity of these officers to act so brazenly in front of witnesses, including children. Did they think no one would speak up, or did they simply not care? Eventually, one of the officers returned to the cell, his demeanor unchanged. "You're lucky we're even letting you make a phone call," he said gruffly, unlocking the door. Evelyn stood calmly and followed him to a desk where a phone awaited her. As she dialed the number of a trusted friend, a former colleague from her days as a federal judge, she noticed the officer smirking behind her. "Think calling someone will get you out of this?" he taunted, clearly enjoying what he assumed was her desperation. Evelyn turned to face him, her expression calm but piercing. For the first time since her arrest, she decided to reveal a piece of herself that she rarely shared with anyone outside her professional circle. "I'm not sure if you realize this," she began, her voice steady and commanding, "but I'm not just any grandmother. I'm a retired federal judge, and trust me when I say, this isn't over." The room fell silent. The officer's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He stared at her, unsure whether to believe her or dismiss her words as a bluff. After a moment, he scoffed and walked away, muttering something under his breath. But Evelyn knew she had planted a seed of doubt. Whether they chose to acknowledge it or not, the truth was undeniable. They had underestimated her, and that mistake would cost them dearly. Back in her cell, Evelyn allowed herself a small private smile. She didn't relish the idea of confronting these officers or dragging them through the consequences of their actions, but she understood the importance of standing firm. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about setting an example. Too many people in her community had suffered silently at the hands of those who abused their power. If sharing her story could inspire others to speak out and demand justice, then she would do so without hesitation. Outside the precinct, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, news of her arrest was already spreading. Neighbors who had seen the officers take her away were talking amongst themselves, outraged by what they had witnessed. Calls were being made, Messages exchanged, and plans formed. By morning, the quiet suburban neighborhood would be buzzing with activity, and the officers who thought they could silence Evelyn would find themselves facing a storm they hadn't anticipated. For now, though, Evelyn remained patient. She closed her eyes and pictured her grandchildren's faces, drawing comfort from the love they shared. Whatever happened next, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. The sun was shining brightly as Evelyn and her grandchildren settled into their day. The kitchen was alive with laughter, and the sweet aroma of banana bread wafting through the air. 10-year-old Marcus was carefully measuring flour, while 6-year-old Lily giggled as she tried to crack an egg without making a mess. Evelyn stood nearby, guiding them with gentle instructions and sharing stories from her childhood. "When I was your age," she said with a smile, "we didn't have all these fancy gadgets. We had to do everything by hand." As the trio worked together, the sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted their cheerful chatter. Evelyn glanced out the window and saw 2 police officers stepping out of their vehicle. Her brow furrowed slightly. She hadn't called for help, and nothing seemed amiss in the neighborhood. Still, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front door, curious about why they were there. "Good morning, officers," Evelyn greeted them warmly, opening the screen door. "Is everything all right?" One of the officers, a tall man with a stern expression, didn't return her smile. Instead, he began questioning her abruptly. "Are you the owner of this property?" he asked, his tone clipped and suspicious. Evelyn blinked, taken aback by the sudden interrogation. "Yes, I am," she replied calmly. "I've lived here for over 20 years. Can I ask what this is about?" The second officer, a younger woman with crossed arms, chimed in. "We received a report of suspicious activity at this address. Someone claimed they saw someone who didn't belong here." Evelyn frowned, confused. "That's strange. This is my home, and I'm here with my grandchildren. There's no one else here but us." Despite her polite explanation, the officers seemed unconvinced. They demanded proof of ownership, glancing past her into the house where the children peeked out nervously. Evelyn quickly retrieved her documents, papers that clearly showed the house belonged to her, and handed them over. But instead of reviewing the evidence thoroughly, the officers dismissed it, their skepticism turning into hostility. "This could be forged," one of them muttered, glaring at Evelyn. "You need to come with us." Marcus stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Why are you taking our grandma? She didn't do anything wrong." Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, silently urging him to stay calm. But the situation only grew worse. When Evelyn questioned their behavior and pointed out that they were acting unprofessionally, the officers became even more aggressive. One of them accused her of being disrespectful, while the other insisted she must have done something to warrant suspicion. Their words carried an undertone of prejudice, though they never outright admitted it. Before anyone could process what was happening, Evelyn found herself being handcuffed in front of her wide-eyed grandchildren. Lily started crying, clutching her brother's arm, while Marcus shouted, "Leave her alone. She's telling the truth." Evelyn kept her composure, refusing to let fear or anger take hold. As she was led toward the police car, she locked eyes with her grandchildren, silently promising them that everything would be okay, even if she wasn't sure herself. The ride to the precinct felt surreal. Evelyn sat quietly in the backseat, replaying the events in her mind. How could this happen? Why were they targeting her? And most importantly, how would she make sure this injustice didn't go unnoticed? Though her heart ached for her grandchildren, who had witnessed something no child should ever see, Evelyn knew she had to remain strong. After all, she had faced prejudice before, and she had always found a way to rise above it. Little did the officers know, they had just crossed paths with someone far more powerful than they realized. In a quiet suburban neighborhood where life moved at a predictable pace, Mrs. Evelyn Thompson lived in a cozy house surrounded by vibrant flowers and tall trees. At 67 years old, Evelyn was known as the heart of her community, a woman whose kindness radiated through every smile and gesture. Her days were filled with simple joys, tending to her garden, baking delicious treats, and spending time with her grandchildren. To everyone who knew her, she was Grams, the warm, wise grandmother who always had an open door and comforting words for anyone in need. Evelyn's home was more than just four walls. It was a sanctuary. The scent of fresh-baked cookies often wafted through the air, drawing neighbors to her doorstep. Children loved visiting because Grams always had something special planned, whether it was crafting projects, storytelling sessions, or impromptu dance parties in the living room. Her grandchildren adored her deeply, not only for her playful spirit, but also for the lessons she taught them about fairness, respect, and standing up for what is right. But beneath Evelyn's calm exterior lay a lifetime of challenges that few people truly understood. Born into a world where opportunities were limited for someone like her, Evelyn had faced discrimination head-on from a young age. She grew up in a small town where being black meant enduring stares, whispers, and sometimes outright hostility. Yet, instead of letting these experiences break her, they shaped her into a resilient woman determined to rise above prejudice. Despite the hardships, Evelyn never let bitterness take root in her heart. Instead, she channeled her pain into purpose. Over the decades, she built a remarkable life, a testament to her strength and perseverance. Though many didn't realize it, Evelyn carried a secret that made her even more extraordinary. Unbeknownst to her neighbors and even some family members, she wasn't just a loving grandmother. She was once one of the most respected figures in the legal system, a retired federal judge who had dedicated her career to fighting for justice and equality. Her home told part of this story. Framed photographs lined the walls, capturing moments from her illustrious career, shaking hands with influential leaders, receiving awards for her contributions to civil rights, and standing proudly in a courtroom robe. But Evelyn rarely spoke about those days. To her, the past was simply a foundation for the present, a reminder of how far she'd come and how much work still needed to be done. On this particular sunny Saturday morning, Evelyn woke up early, as she always did. After sipping her coffee on the porch, she began preparing for another joyful day with her grandchildren. They arrived shortly after breakfast, bursting through the front door with laughter and excitement. "Grams, can we bake cookies today?" asked 8-year-old Mia, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Evelyn chuckled and nodded, ushering them inside. As they gathered ingredients in the kitchen, none of them could have imagined how drastically their day would change, or the hidden strength their beloved grandmother would soon reveal. The neighborhood seemed peaceful outside, with birds chirping and leaves rustling gently in the breeze. But little did Evelyn know, trouble was brewing just beyond her doorstep. Within hours, her quiet world would be shattered, forcing her to confront the ugliness of racism once again. And though the events ahead would test her resilience, they would also remind everyone around her of the incredible power she possessed, not just as a grandmother, but as a symbol of hope and justice.